Beatrice, thank you
Thank
for
you for.
having me. Thank you, friends of the Inter-American Institute for Democracy. I'm very glad to be with you here again. It's a very important forum that we're attending today. Uh, we have to talk about Brazil. Yes, it's a very opportune and important moment in our history. We have persecutions, political persecutions going on. We have a very weak government. We have an alliance between the executive power and the judiciary power. It's an unheard of type of tyranny that has been imposed in Brazil. And it's a very difficult one for you to mobilize against, especially when the judiciary rewrites laws and rewrites the constitution on its own accord without going through the due process of Congress. So we're actually living a living example of what the judiciary dictatorship would look like. Although they deny it, they call it in the name of democracy and the name of freedom, but it's anything but that. It's exactly the opposite. It's in the name of control and tyranny and arbitrary rule over our citizenship and over the resources of our country and the other representative powers. So this is a very dire situation as far as political situation is concerned, as far as the control that is being exerted from a small group onto the population. The good news on the political front is that the popularity of the government and all institutions is at its all-time low. Absolutely, there's very little public support for anything that the government is doing and for the judiciary institution, as well as all other institutions where the current government has actually nominated members. So this is actually a very good moment for Brazilian public opinion, but Brazilian real democracy, as far as population is concerned. So in that aspect, politically speaking, I have to judge it as being a double-edged sword. From on one side, the weak government is exercising its full power in order to maintain itself and using and destroying all the institutions in order to arbitrarily sustain its tyrannical rule. On the opposite side, if we have the chance of free and fair elections in the next cycle, it is very probable that this government and this type of regime will not be reelected. So that is the good news coupled with the bad news on the political side. On the economic side, I would say it's not a very good news as well. It's mostly bad news because we will have to sustain for the next 600 days up until next election and the new government takes power. We'll have to sustain all these measures that the current government is taking. So it's socialist orientation. It centralizing power. It's doing central planning. It's building a central planning system that is unheard of in the history of Brazil. And most of the institutions that are involved in the central planning, they're not qualified to be central planners. So we have a non-qualified, maybe even criminal central institutions centralizing even more power on the central government in Brasilia, and specifically mention the tax reform system, where it takes all the autonomy away from the 5,600 cities of Brazil and the 27 and 26 federal entities, the states and municipalities, will now be in as far as the tax law will all be associated with this centralized tax regime from which all the taxation will happen, and then they will redistribute back to the municipalities and the states. So the bargaining power that the central government will gain over all the municipalities in all the states is unheard of. So it's the reverse of federalism that we're living at this point, based on exclusively the tax reform that was bought from the current Congress. And I say specifically bought because government actually had to bribe in a legal sense. It bribed most of the congressmen to actually pass this new tax regime. So what we're seeing from the economic side is all these measures in order to sustain a concentration of power, concentration of um, tax revenues on the central government. Basically, all the rules and regulations and public policy will be centralized as well, and that is what we'll have to live with until the next government. And hopefully, the next government will have a decentralizing posture. Will basically revise every single tax reform measurement that measure that we voted favorably in the last 2 years, to reverse them. And that's what I think is the big challenge, because in the meantime, economically, we have a fake economics. We have government spending because it's concentrating all this power, which is creating a fake growth. So it's growth based on government spending. The actual real and sustainable free enterprise, it's being almost stagnant, or maybe even in the beginning of a recession. So that's what we have. At the same time, as far as employment is concerned, most of the employment numbers are also very skewed towards showing low unemployment, not only because we don't believe the unemployment numbers, but also because there are many social programs that are not sustainable, and the government has been paying for people to actually don't work. It's creating a reverse incentive for them not to produce. So that's creating, so they're not looking for a job. So they're basically receiving government allowances, and that's taking a huge amount of the workforce out of the economics Brazilian economy. And we're seeing a lot of labor shortages, even for the public sector, as well as for the free enterprise sector. So that's the economic side. It's eventually when our debt levels reach unsustainable regarding the current tax, not the current, the interest rates that we're paying. We're paying one of the highest interest rates in the world now, and our debt levels are growing because we don't have fiscal discipline. So it's very likely that once the government needs to cut back on all these social programs, the unemployment number is likely to balloon and explode to 2 digits, or and be very, very worrisome, either for this government or for the next. So that is our situation. Unfortunately, the economic side, I don't see any change going forward. So what can we do? As far as institutionally, what the Constitution of Brazil is a very flawed constitution. It's a socialist constitution. It praises government intervention. It praises centralization of power, at the same time that it has some mechanisms for decentralization. But essentially, it's a socialist constitution that centralizes power, and politically, it's very ambiguous, mainly because it reflects who wrote the Constitution. At that time, it was a constituency made of a plurality of political parties and oligarchical interests. So politically, it was never really a presidential system or a parliamentary system. It was designed to be more of a parliamentary system. However, over the past 30 years, the executive power harnessed a lot of the legislative power to itself via government agencies that are nominated by the executive branch. So you have many agencies that take care of electricity, that take care of trusts, the action of trust, that take care of the agribusiness, that take care of commerce business, and they enact regulations on their own, and they're nominated by the government. And the only way that Congress can actually curtail what they're doing is actually going through the very long and difficult process of actually enacting a law through Congress. So you have most of the executive now have all these agencies that have a very quick and an efficient way of normalizing, creating norms and taxes and and penalties for different sectors of the economy through the agencies, whereas Congress has a very long process for it to pass similar laws or norms. So it's very difficult for you to fight these agencies. So the executive branch gained a lot of power over the past 30 years. At the same time, it gained a lot of leverage over buying the congressman via what we called it's an allowance that every congressman receives in order for him to spend that allowance in his own state. And what happens with that is that most Brazilian congressmen that actually they focus on getting the allowance and they don't really focus on actually discussing good legislation or monitoring the executive branch activity. So most of the Congress is basically void of voices, of representative voices. They're only focused on getting the allowance and going back to their constituencies and spending that allowance in order to guarantee that they'll be reelected in the next period. So we have a lot of distortions on our representative model that needs to be revised. And in parallel to that, the judiciary branch discovered a way to work with all these distortions and harness even more power to itself. So the judiciary branch now is currently the supreme power of Brazil. It acts as a legislator, it acts as a executive branch, and it acts as well as a judiciary branch. And that reflects a lot of what the formal structure of a communist regime is, which they have a permanent small bureau of technocrats that actually summon Congress only once or twice a year for them to basically approve of the many legislations and executive orders that they actually want to push forward. So we're actually reflecting that, not having that formally on paper, but we are reflecting that type of structure informally on the practices. So effectively, we need to get out of this system somehow. And the two ways of doing that is people in the streets revolting against the whole system and actually pushing forward reforms. And I think that we're just starting with that because most of the population, they only mobilize for electoral process and for populists and political figures. They don't mobilize for causes. So that's one thing that we need to still work with, is getting population to support causes so that we can push forward a lot of these reforms. At the same time, constitutionally, as I mentioned, we are currently in the destruction. We're not working effectively. Institutionally, we have no recourse. So any intervention outside of Brazil will be very welcome, especially when it regards any abuse of power from the judiciary. And that's exactly what's happening at this moment. We have a very prominent parliamentarian, which is the son of the ex-president of Brazil, Eduardo Bolsonaro, and he was basically out of fear of losing passport and rights and being persecuted in the next election. He actually fled the country in order to preserve his rights to speak, his rights to actually manifest himself against the government. So he's currently in the U.S. and working with the U.S. government, and how the U.S. government can actually, through its judiciary system, actually see ways of criminalizing some of the criminal actions that many judges and maybe even members of Brazilian government have been enacting against Brazilian Constitution and obviously against the U.S. Constitution and U.S. interests that are currently in Brazil. So aside from these external interventions, be it from the judiciary system of the United States, or be it from the people manifesting their will on the streets, we're fresh out of alternatives from an institutional standpoint. The only other hope that we have is that in 2026, we will still have free and fair elections in order to make sure that at least a good portion of our representative system is substituted so that it can pass all these reforms. And we hope that these reforms that we need from an institutional standpoint will be reflected by this new body of representatives. So that is what is actually keeping us in the game as far as our hopes up. I just wanted to finish my interference here and my introduction as to where is Brazil going. If Brazil maintains this course with this weak government and with the judiciary power exercising arbitrary rule, it's for sure that will definitely end up aligning ourselves even more with the dictatorships of the world, the tyrannical regimes that are dependent on narco trafficking and terrorism. If there are positive interventions in Brazil, we have a chance to reestablishing the rule of law and to becoming a free country, and also, which I think is as important as having a very strong political system, is having a very strong economic power in the hands of the Brazilian middle class, which will assure that we have a nation that is certainly to occupy the position of one of the top economies and one of the most important countries in the world. Right now, we're in the quagmire of our political system, and we're dependent on these variables that I mentioned previously. Friends of the Inter-American Institute for Democracy, thank you very much for having us and having this opportunity to explain what's going on in Brazil, and we'll be available anytime for any further questions. Thank you very much. Have a great event. Thank you, Beatrice, and everybody.
Thank